All right, woo! Oh man, y'all are in for it. Okay, good night. What a morning we've had here. Okay, not going to introduce myself. You're going to have to figure that one out on your own. Not going to give you a quick review. Just going to have to try and remember that one, what we're talking about with rethinking, all right? Here's the question I have for you today. How many of you have ever had an experience, you sat in a space and said, I'm not worthy? Anybody ever have that feeling, right? I'm not worthy. This is a really, really powerful emotional experience. And it's really a question of esteem. It's how we think other people think about us. Right? When we say, I'm not worthy, I don't feel worthy, we're making a judgment call about what it's so weird for me to be doing this right now. I just want you to know that after that conversation, I'm trying to get my head around let's change their life with this message. And I'm like, I don't know if this is possible. I'm having this internal dialogue, okay? But we'll shrink it down and we'll give everybody enough information to be confused, okay? This question, this statement that I'm not worthy, is really a question of how we think other people perceive us. And it spills over into how we think God perceives us. When we think I'm not worthy, really what we're saying is, what is the story that I'm telling myself about other people and even God? How does God think about me, right? That's the idea of this understanding of worthiness. And when we shift into a space of I'm not worthy, it's grounded in a way of seeing the world that is very, very common, that gets baked into us because it holds our psyches, it holds our souls together, and it's something called the just world theory. And the just world theory says this: people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. How many of you have ever heard anything like that? Right? You know somebody in your neighborhood and their car breaks down and they're kind of a jerk and you're like, oh, you get what you deserve, right? That way of seeing the world, and again, I'm giving you this 50,000 foot view of the theory, but that's the idea. And that theory governs the way in which we experience the world and the way in which we experience others. And it's powerful because it feels safe. It feels like we can control some things. Like good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. But here's the thing. It doesn't always work that way, right? And what that theory does, what that space that we hold turns into oftentimes is victim shaming, victim blaming. Someone goes through something really painful, injurious, traumatic, abusive, and we go into this just world theory. You go through that, you experience that, and you say, I must have done something to deserve it. And so we internalize that belief. Something bad happened to me, therefore I must have done something wrong. We experience that. And so we move into, I did something to deserve this. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy to be protected. The world the world is fair, and so I deserve all of this. Because it's too much for our brains to go, the world isn't just. Because if we have to hold space that the world isn't just, that's terrifying. That I could do all the right things in life, and I could still have terrible, horrible things happen to me. And so in our space to try and figure out how to make it all fit and how to survive and how to function, we go into this space that says, I'm not worthy. And it's that story that we tell ourselves to preserve the illusion of justness in the world as baked into it, right? So that the world can make sense. And this is one of the most universal lies that dysregulates our nervous system, that causes us to go into survival mode. And that just world trap puts us in a cycle of shame and hustle, right? Shame and hustle. Because now, instead of living from a space of worth as just an inherent quality, we think we've got to earn it. And so we spend our whole lives navigating that. How do I earn people's love? How do I earn people's security? And when that is lost, right, we sacrifice worth to try and maintain some sense of order. So think of it like this way. If you're a child and home is supposed to be safe, and you have this deep belief that parents are supposed to be loving, but all of a sudden you experience intense pain, trauma, abuse, your brain is concluding, okay, to be safe, I must have done something wrong. They hurt me, but I deserved it. And it's a way you hold it all together to make sense of it. And so worthiness will stop being about a birthright for who you are, because you are here, because you are present, and it will become performance. The hustle begins. And that's what we need to unpack a little bit of if we're going to rethink thoughts, because this is a big one. Because bad things are going to happen to us, and that cycle repeats. We start to feel good, things are happening, I'm doing the right thing. You don't change anything, and all of a sudden something bad happens, you go right back into this cycle. And so we no longer live from worth, but we spend our lives running from unworthiness. That's the source of pain. That's the source. That's where things get all tangled up and things get hard and difficult. And I want to look real quickly at the story of a guy named Mephibosheth. That's a good name. It's available. Mephibosheth@gmail.com. I'm positive is out there, okay? 2 Samuel tells us the story of Mephibosheth, and it offers us some wisdom and some perspective when all of a sudden your life feels worthless. Okay? So 2 Samuel chapter 9, you can go back to chapter 6 or chapter 4 to really get it, but we see this person who has experienced some really big pain. So 2 Samuel chapter 4 verse 4 says, Saul's son Jonathan, okay, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. And his nurse picked him up and fled. And in her haste to flee, it happened that he fell and became lame. And his name was Mephibosheth. So what has happened here? There's a civil war going on. Jonathan and Saul are killed in a battle. Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, who has a crippling disability in his feet, but seemingly was able to walk at some level, is now going to flee. So his nurse picks him up, and in going, falls, something happens, and now he's crippled and changed forever. And the story tells us that they go and they flee and they kind of live in hiding. And they live in hiding in a place called Lo-Debar. And Lo-Debar, if you translate it, means like empty field. It means nothing. So his whole life now, fast forward about 20 years, he's lived in hiding. Why is he living in hiding? Because he's an heir to the throne. And if you've ever watched Game of Thrones, that's a tough position to be in. So he's hiding in Lo-Debar for 20 years, waiting for them to find him. He's living in a place where his namesake is like son of no one. Son of no one. He's not royalty. He's a burden. Every meal that he receives, every time he needs to move, he is a burden to someone. Someone has to move him. Someone has to carry him. So he's lived this whole life as a son of no one. He's a burden, part of a fallen dynasty, living in hiding, waiting every day. Well, one day it happens. They show up. One day it happens. The men of David, the soldiers, they show up because David says, I want to know, is there an heir to Saul? Is there an heir to Jonathan for his name's sake? Because Jonathan and David were the best of friends. And we find out in 2 Samuel chapter 9 that David's like, is there anybody? And we find out that there's this guy, and he's been in hiding. And so he sends for the soldiers, and the soldiers get him. And the soldiers finally show up. What do you think Mephibosheth hears? This is the end. This is the end. And so he travels from Lo-Debar to Jerusalem. It's about 80 miles. He has to be carried. It probably took much longer than we would imagine. He's afraid what's going to happen. When he hears he's got to show up before the king, he doesn't hear invitation. He hears execution. I'm giving you these fill-ins. Come on, people. Stay with me. He's coming into this space going, oh no. And you just have to imagine the journey from Lo-Debar to Jerusalem, back to the palace that he fled. He's the heir, the fear, everything that's going on in his mind. You just have to imagine that. He's being carried by servants. His legs are wrapped. His body is weak from years of limited movement. This trip probably would have taken a week. And all of a sudden he sees the city off in the distance, and the heart starts racing, and the panic and the anxiety sets in. But he just knows he's worthless anyway. And the gates open up, and he enters into the city, and he's brought in before David, and he's scared out of his mind. And the text says that he falls down on his face. And he doesn't fall on his face in front of David out of worship or anything like that. He falls out of shame and fear. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 6 says this: Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, fell on his face, and he did obeisance. It's a good word. How many of y'all do obeisance to your spouse? Hopefully not. And David says to him, Mephibosheth, and he answered, I am your servant. So when Mephibosheth finally enters in, he doesn't walk in, remember, he's carried, he's set down, he falls forward as if to say, I'm no threat, I'm no one. Obeisance, this ancient posture of fear and submission, I'm no one. It's not just reverence, it's survival. Because in this world, right, if you wanted to survive and stay alive in the presence of power, that's what you did. You became nothing. And he expects to hear, you're condemned to death. But instead, what does he hear? David says, Mephibosheth. And in verse 9, David says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you yourself will eat at my table. And in a single sentence, everything changes. The man who saw himself as unworthy is given a seat of highest honor. This man who grew up believing in hiding that he was cursed, that he was a burden, is now treated as a cherished one. He expected judgment and he finds belonging, but notice the deep wound that's in his soul, because his response to this love mirrors this entanglement that we experience of our worthiness. Because in verse 10, he's invited to the table. Look what he says. It says he did obeisance again, and he said, what is your servant that you should look upon a dead dog such as I? A dead dog. That's how he saw himself. He had come to a space of unworthiness that he was self-dehumanizing. And I love David here in this situation. He doesn't erase his past. The story doesn't erase his past. The story embraces it. Because if you read ahead to verse 13, which is a beautiful ending to this story that has all kinds of issues that we don't have time to talk about, but the beautiful ending to this story, right? In verse 13, it says, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he always ate at the king's table. And what is the last line? Now he was lame in both his feet. Isn't that amazing? You're like, what are you talking about, Ryan? It's awful. No, it's amazing. The story doesn't erase his pain. We aren't left with an image of a person who had a limp and doesn't have a limp anymore. We aren't left with a person who was kind of crippled and is now fixed. No, we're left with the scene of a table that says your wounds and your shame and all of that stuff is welcome here. Where there's no hiding the two lame feet. That's the beauty of it. This is a story where there is a table where pain isn't hidden. And the table becomes this site of untangling all of that shame and all of that hurt from these past experiences. And it's a table that says you will no longer be defined by that. But it can be a part of your story and it can be redeemed by grace. And that's the wisdom of the passage. That's the beauty of it. It's a story of a journey from the barrenness of Lo-debar to the belonging at the table of a king. And when David restores Mephibosheth, he shows him what divine love looks like. That love makes room for the forgotten and the unworthy and calls them family. So don't miss this. Don't miss this. Love doesn't ignore our shame. Love welcomes it to the table. It welcomes it to the table. Love doesn't ignore it, doesn't ignore our shame, our feeling of unworthiness. It welcomes it to the table. And as we rush through this story, We have to remember this was a forgotten man, dragged out of hiding, trembling before the king, hearing words he never expected. You have a place. You are not worthless. You are mine. Jesus himself uses this same imagery in a parable. He talks about a man who sent everybody out and invited everybody, and they said, no, we're too busy. And then the owner gets angry, and he orders his servants, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. Bring in the ones whose shame and esteem are all tangled into survival, who aren't welcome at any other table because they are welcome at my table. These were all the sinners, the people who deserved it, because good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And so to give you your fill-ins in the next 2 minutes, here you go. In your everyday normal life, sit at tables where your shame and your stories are welcome. Sit at tables where your shame and your stories are welcome. Do not sit at tables where your shame and your story is not welcome. Don't hide the parts of yourself that limp. You are worthy. And then I want to encourage you to create tables. Create tables where shame is welcome. Create tables where the whole story is welcome. So sit at tables where your shame is welcome, where your story is welcome, and then create tables where other shame and other stories are welcome. And just listen without fixing. Stay present in people's pain. Be a co-regulator with them in their nervous system. Be a presence of calm and stillness. And when we do that, we're saying you have a place. You're not worthless. You belong here. And that makes the world a better place. That makes you a better person, because these are the tables where shame and hustle are transformed into esteem and rest. And that's what I want you to bring to communion. You don't have to eat fast. The tables like this are where shame and dysregulation and the entanglement of survival are all untangled and transformed into an understanding of worthiness and rest. And so we're going to get you out of here pretty close to the top end of what we like to have you leave here. But I want to give you a few minutes to just think about the table that you need to sit at that embraces what you think is shameful, what the world has told you is shameful, and know that tables here, these tables, no, shame is welcome, stories are welcome. All of you is welcome. The song they're going to sing, we're going to sing. I want to invite you to stand all over, whether you're at a table or not. If you're able to stand. You've got a lot of words coming at you today, so let's do some silence. They're going to sing a song called I Am Good. And this song is a declaration of the goodness that exists in every person on this planet because of who they are. And you'd say, oh, but Ryan, I know the Bible verse. They came up to Jesus and they said, good rabbi. And Jesus said, why would you call me good? No one is good but God. Why would we sing a song that says I am good? Because I actually think Jesus was challenging them on their belief that no one is good. I don't think Jesus was saying, hey, you got this one right, finally. That's inconsistent with the text and Jesus' encounter with the religious leaders. Jesus is saying, well, if you don't believe anybody's good, why would you call me good? If only God is good, why would you call me good? He's not saying, well, you get it, I'm God. Trust me, that's not what's going, that is not the talk of a sane person in first century Galilee. Like what Jesus is saying is, you are contradicting yourself as you try to please me or whatever. So we're going to sing this song, I'm Good. And if you're here today in the rush of all the words and in the weirdness of a building that's just land and brick and mortar that is not going to be here in 200 years anyway, I just invite you to take a couple of minutes and sing I'm Good. And eat the bread and drink the juice that are the ultimate symbol that you are so good and you are so loved, that God in our tradition is made manifest through the person Jesus, the incarnation of love, who gave his life rather than take others, because you are so good. So we'll sing this. I'll give you your blessing. I'll get you out of here.